farthest south was the most southerly latitudes reached by explorers before the conquest of the South Pole in 1911. Significant steps on the road to the pole were the discovery of lands south of Cape Horn in 1619, Captain James Cook's crossing of the Antarctic Circle in 1773, and the earliest confirmed sightings of the Antarctic mainland in 1820. For the late 19th century onward, the quest for farthest south latitudes became in effect a race to reach the pole, which culminated in Roald Amundsen's success in December 1911. In the years before reaching the pole was a realistic objective. Other motives drew adventurers southward. Initially, the driving force was the discovery of new trade routes between Europe and the Far East. After such routes had been established and the main geographical features of the Earth had been broadly mapped, the lure for mercantile adventurers was the great fertile continent of Terra Australis, which, according to myth, lay hidden in the south. Belief in the existence of this supposed land of plenty persisted well into the 18th century. Explorers were reluctant to accept the truth that slowly emerged of a cold, harsh environment in the lands of the Southern Ocean. James Cook's voyages of 1771 to 74 demonstrated conclusively the likely hostile nature of any hidden lands. This caused a shift of emphasis in the first half of the 19th century, away from trade and towards exploration and discovery. After the first overwintering on continental Antarctica in 1899, the prospect of reaching the South Pole appeared realistic, and the race for the pole began. The British were preeminent in this endeavour, which was characterized by the rivalry between Robert Falcon Scott and Ernest Shackleton during the heroic age of Antarctic exploration. Shackleton's efforts fell short. Scott reached the pole in January 1912 only to find that he had been beaten by the Norwegian Amundsen. Early voyages. In 1494, the principal maritime powers, Portugal and Spain, signed a treaty which drew a line down the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and allocated all trade routes to the east of the line to Portugal. That gave Portugal dominance of the only known route to the east via the Cape of Good Hope and Indian Ocean, which left Spain, and later other countries, to seek a western route to the Pacific. The exploration of the South began as part of the search for such a route. Unlike the Arctic, there is no evidence of human visitation or habitation in Antarctica or the islands around it prior to European exploration. However, the most southerly parts of South America were already inhabited by tribes such as the Selknam, the Yagan, Yumana, the Alikaloof and the Haush. The Haush in particular made regular trips to Isla de los Estados, which was 29 kilometers from the main island of Tierra del Fuego, suggesting that some of them may have been capable of reaching the islands near Cape Horn. Fuegian Indian artifacts and canoe remnants have also been discovered on the Falkland Islands, suggesting the capacity for even longer sea journeys. While the natives of Tierra del Fuego were not capable of true oceanic travel, there is some evidence of Polynesian visits to some of the subantarctic islands to the south of New Zealand. Although these are further from Antarctica than South America, there are also remains of a Polynesian settlement dating back to the 13th century on Enderby Island in the Auckland Islands. According to ancient legends, around the year 650 the Polynesian traveller Suiterangiora led a fleet of Wakatilwai south until they reached a place of bitter cold where rock-like structures rose from a solid sea. It is unclear from the legends how far south Suiterangiora penetrated, but it appears that he observed ice in large quantities. A shard of undated, unidentified pottery, reported as found in 1886 in the Antipodes Islands, has been associated with this expedition. Ferdinand Magellan. Although Portuguese by birth, Ferdinand Magellan transferred his allegiance to King Charles I of Spain, on whose behalf he left Seville on 10 August 1519 with a squadron of 5 ships, in search of a western route to the Spice Islands in the East Indies. Success depended on finding a straighter passage through the South American land masses, or finding the southern tip of the continent and sailing around it. The South American coast was sighted on 6 December 1519, and Magellan moved cautiously southward, following the coast to reach latitude 49 degrees south on 31 March 1520. Little if anything was known of the coast south at this point, so Magellan decided to wait out the southern winter here and established the settlement of Puerto San Julian. In September 1520, the voyage continued down the uncharted coast, and on 21 October reached 52 degrees south. Here Magellan found a deep inlet which proved to be the strait he was seeking, later to be known by his name. Early in November 1520, as the squadron navigated through the strait, they reached its most southerly point at approximate latitude 54 degrees south. This was a record farthest south for a European navigator, though not the farthest southern penetration by man. The position was north of the Tierra del Fuego archipelago, where there is evidence of human settlement dating back thousands of years. Francisco de Hos's the first sighting of an ocean passage to the Pacific south of Tierra del Fuego is sometimes attributed to Francisco de Hos's of the Loaiza expedition. In January 1526, his ship San Lesmes was blown south from the Atlantic entrance of the Magellan Strait to a point where the crew thought they saw a headland, and water beyond it which indicated the southern extremity of the continent. It is speculation as to which headland they saw. Conceivably it was Cape Horn. In parts of the Spanish-speaking world it is believed that de Hosses may have discovered the strait later known as the Drake Passage more than 50 years before Sir Francis Drake. The British privateer, Sir Francis Drake sailed from Plymouth on 15 November 1577, in command of a fleet of 5 ships under his flagship Pelican, later renamed the Golden Hind. His principal objective was plunder, not exploration. His initial targets were the unfortified Spanish towns on the Pacific coasts of Chile and Peru. Following Magellan's route, Drake reached Puerto San Julian on 20 June. After nearly 2 months in harbor, Drake left the port with a reduced fleet of 3 ships and a small pinnace. His ships entered the Magellan Strait on 23 August and emerged in the Pacific Ocean on 6 September. Drake set a course to the northwest, but on the following day a gale scattered the ships. The Marigold was sunk by a giant wave. The Elizabeth managed to return into the Magellan Strait, later sailing eastwards back to England. The Pinnace was lost later. The gales persisted for more than 7 weeks. The Golden Hind was driven far to the west and south before clawing its way back towards land. On the 22nd of October, the ship anchored off an island which Drake named Elizabeth Island, where wood for the galley fires was collected and seals and penguins captured for food. According to Drake's Portuguese pilot, Nuno da Silva, the position at the anchorage was 57 degrees south. However, there is no island at that latitude. The as yet undiscovered Diego Ramirez Islands, at 56 degrees 30°, are treeless and cannot have been the islands where Drake's crew collected wood. This indicates that the navigational calculation was faulty, and that Drake landed at or near the then unnamed Cape Horn, possibly on Horn Island itself. His final southern latitude can only be speculated as that of Cape Horn, at 55 degrees 59°. In his report, Drake wrote, "The uttermost Cape headland of all these islands stands near 56 degrees, without which there is no main island to be seen to the southwards but that the Atlantic Ocean and the South Sea meet." Quote, "This open sea south of Cape Horn became known as the Drake Passage even though Drake himself did not traverse it." William Schouten on 14 June 1615, Willem Schouten, with 2 ships in Dracht and Horn, set sail from Texel in the Netherlands in search of a western route to the Pacific. Horn was lost in a fire, but in Dracht continued southward. On 29 January 1616, Schouten reached what he discerned to be the southernmost cape of the South American continent. He named this point Cape Horn after his hometown, and his lost ship. Schouten's navigational readings are inaccurate. He placed Cape Horn at 57 degrees 48 south, when its actual position is 55 degrees 58. His claim to have reached 58 degrees south is unverified, although he sailed on westward to become the first European navigator to reach the Pacific via the Drake Passage. Garcia de Nodal expedition. The next recorded navigation of the Drake Passage was achieved in February 1619 by the brothers Bartolome and Gonzalo Garcia de Nodal. The Garcia de Nodal expedition discovered a small group of islands about 60 nautical miles southwest of Cape Horn, at latitude 56 degrees 30 S. They named these the Diego Ramirez Islands after the expedition's pilot. The islands remained the most southerly known land on Earth until Captain James Cook's discovery of the South Sandwich Islands in 1775. Other voyages brought further discoveries in the southern oceans. In August 1592, the English seaman John Davis had taken shelter among certain isles never before discovered, presumed to be the Falkland Islands. In 1675, the English merchant voyager Anthony de la Roche sighted South Georgia. In 1739, the Frenchman Jean-Baptiste Bouvet de Lozier discovered the remote Bouvet Island, and in 1772, his compatriot Yves-Joseph de Kerguelen de Trémarec found the Kerguelen Islands. Early Antarctic explorers. Captain James Cook, the second of James Cook's historic voyages, 1772 to 1775, was primarily a search for the elusive terra australis incognita that was still believed to lie somewhere in the unexplored latitudes below 40 degrees south. Cook left England in September 1772 with 2 ships, HMS Resolution and HMS Adventure. After pausing at Cape Town on the 22nd of November, the 2 ships sailed due south but were driven to the east by heavy gales. They managed to edge further south, encountering the first pack ice on the 10th of December. This soon became a solid barrier, which tested Cook's seamanship as he maneuvered for a passage through. Eventually, he found open water, and was able to continue south. On the 17th of January 1773, the expedition reached the Antarctic Circle at 66 degrees 20 S. The first ships to do so. Further progress was barred by ice, and the ships turned northeastwards and headed for New Zealand, which they reached on the 26th of March. During the ensuing months, the expedition explored the southern Pacific Ocean before Cook took Resolution south again. Adventure had retired back to South Africa after a fracas with the New Zealand native population. This time Cook was able to penetrate deep beyond the Antarctic Circle, and on the 30th of January 1774 reached 71 degrees 10 S, his farthest south. But the state of the ice made further southward travel impossible. This southern record would hold for 49 years. In the course of his voyages in Antarctic waters, Cook had encircled the world at latitudes generally above 60 degrees south, and saw nothing but bleak inhospitable islands, without a hint of the fertile continent which some still hope lay in the south. Cook read that if any such continent existed it would be a country doomed by nature, and that no man will venture further than I have done, and the land to the south will never be explored. He concluded, should the impossible be achieved and the land attained, it would be wholly useless and of no benefit to the discoverer or his nation. Searching for land despite Cook's prediction, the early 19th century saw numerous attempts to penetrate southward, and to discover new lands. In 1819, William Smith, in command of the brigantine Williams, discovered the South Shetland Islands, and in the following year Edward Bransfield, in the same ship, sighted the Trinity Peninsula at the northern extremity of Graham Land. A few days before Bransfield's discovery, on the 27th of January 1820, the Russian captain Fabian von Bellingshausen, in another Antarctic sector, had come within sight of the coast of what is now known as Queen Maud Land. He is thus credited as the first person to see the continent's mainland, although he did not make this claim himself. Bellingshausen made 2 circumnavigations mainly in latitudes between 60 and 67 degrees south, and in January 1821 reached his most southerly point at 70 degrees south, in a longitude close to that in which Cook had made his record 47 years earlier. In 1821 the American sealing Captain John Davis led a party which landed on an uncharted stretch of land beyond the South Shetlands. I think this southern land to be a continent, he wrote in his ship's log. If his landing was not on an island, his party were the first to set foot on the Antarctic continent. James Weddell was an Anglo-Scottish seaman who saw service in both the Royal Navy and the Merchant Marine before undertaking his first voyages to Antarctic waters. In 1819, in command of the 160-ton brigantine Jane, which had been adapted for whaling, he set sail for the newly discovered whaling grounds of the South Sandwich Islands. His chief interest on this voyage was in finding the Aurora Islands, which had been reported at 53 degrees south, 48 degrees west by the Spanish ship Aurora in 1762. He failed to discover this non-existent land, but his sealing activities showed a handsome profit. In 1822 Weddell, again in command of Jane and this time accompanied by the smaller ship Beaufoy, set sail for the south with instructions from his employers that, should the sealing prove barren, he was to investigate beyond the track of former navigators. This suited Weddell's exploring instincts, and he equipped his vessel with chronometers, thermometers, compasses, barometers and charts. In January 1823, he probed the waters between the South Sandwich Islands and the South Orkney Islands, looking for new land. Finding none, he turned southward down the 40 degrees west meridian, deep into the sea that now bears his name. The season was unusually calm, and Weddell reported that not a particle of ice of any description was to be seen. On the 20th of February 1823, he reached a new farthest south of 74 degrees 15 3 degrees beyond Cook's former record. Unaware that he was close to land, Weddell decided to return northward from this point, convinced that the sea continued as far as the South Pole. Another 2 days' sailing would likely have brought him within sight of Coates Land, which was not discovered until 1904 by William Speirs Bruce during the Scottish National Antarctic Expedition 1902-04. On his return to England, Weddell's claim to have exceeded Cook's record by such a margin caused some raised eyebrows, but was soon accepted. Benjamin Morrell. In November 1823, the American sealing captain Benjamin Morrell reached the South Sandwich Islands in the schooner Wasp. According to his own later account, he then sailed south, unconsciously following the track taken by James Weddell a month previously. Morrell claimed to have reached 70 degrees 14'S, at which point he turned north because the ship's stoves were running short of fuel. Otherwise, he says, he could have reached 85 degrees without the least doubt. Quote, after turning, he claimed to have encountered land which he described in some detail, and which he named New South Greenland. This land proved not to exist. Morrell's reputation as a liar and a fraud means that most of his geographical claims have been dismissed by scholars, although attempts have been made to rationalize his assertions. James Clark Ross's 1839-43 Antarctic expedition in HMS Erebus and HMS Terror was a full-scale Royal Naval enterprise, the principal function of which was to test current theories on magnetism and to try to locate the South Magnetic Pole. The expedition had first been proposed by leading astronomer Sir John Herschel, and was supported by the Royal Society and the British Association for the Advancement of Science. Ross had considerable past experience in magnetic observation and Arctic exploration. In May 1831, he had been a member of a party that had reached the location of the North Magnetic Pole, and he was an obvious choice as commander. The expedition left England on the 30th of September 1839, and after a voyage that was slowed by the many stops required to carry out work on magnetism, it reached Tasmania in August 1840. Following a 3-month break imposed by the southern winter, they sailed southeast on the 12th of November 1840, and crossed the Antarctic Circle on the 1st of January 1841. On the 11th of January, a long mountainous coastline that stretched to the south was sighted. Ross named the land Victoria Land, and the mountains the Admiralty Range. He followed the coast southwards and passed Weddell's farthest south point of 74 degrees 15'S on the 23rd of January. A few days later, as they moved further eastward to avoid shore ice, they were met by the sight of twin volcanoes, which were named Mount Erebus and Mount Terror in honor of the expedition's ships. The Great Ice Barrier stretched away east of these mountains, forming an impassable obstacle to further southward progress. In his search for a strait or inlet, Ross explored 300 nautical miles along the edge of the barrier, and reached an approximate latitude of 78 degrees south on or about the 8th of February 1841. He failed to find a suitable anchorage that would have allowed the ships to overwinter, so he returned to Tasmania, arriving there in April 1841. The following season, Ross returned and located an inlet in the barrier face that enabled him, on the 23rd of January 1842, to extend his farthest south to 78 degrees 09'30'S, a record which would remain unchallenged for 58 years. Although Ross had not been able to land on the Antarctic continent, nor approach the location of the South Magnetic Pole, on his return to England in 1843, he was knighted for his achievements in geographical and scientific exploration.